Welcome to the China Influencer Marketing Podcast. Each week, we speak with top influencers, marketers, and brands who share their experiences, strategies, and tactics for influencer marketing in China. Here's your host, Lauren Hallinan.
Hi everyone, welcome to the China Influencer Marketing Podcast. If you heard last week's episode, then you know that this is number 2, the second episode with Michael Norris, Consumer Research Manager at Resonance China. If you haven't already, I definitely recommend you go back and check out his first interview. In this episode, we start out discussing JD.com's 618 shopping holiday and make some guesses as to why, despite its incredible sales figures, there was relatively little coverage of the event in Western media in comparison to Alibaba's Singles Day. Then we switch topics completely and talk about video game live streaming, particularly viewers' top motives for watching video game live streaming. And I think you'll be interested to hear what Michael shares. It's not what you might think. Then, lastly, I get Michael's take on a report that Tencent's Penguin Research released earlier this year. The report found that Chinese post-2000 consumers trust wanghong and davi less than celebrities. Many people have misconstrued this to mean that post-2000s consumers don't trust influencers, and I argued that that is not what the report is saying at all. So anyway, we cover a lot of topics, huge variety of topics, and I hope you enjoy this second episode with Michael Norris. Before we start, I just want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsor, Parkloo. Parkloo is China's premier influencer marketing platform. Learn more at parkloo.com. And now, on to interview number 2 with Michael Norris. You had mentioned the JD's 618 shopping sales day, right a little while ago when we got into the mini programs. And so I would love to dive into that a bit more because I think that you agree with me that JD's shopping holiday has been reported much less, especially in Western media, than in comparison to Singles Day, which we hear about for months before and after Singles Day. It's just nonstop. So I was just wondering, you reported some amazing, sales figures and sharing and conversions, and so what do you think is going on? I mean, why isn't 618 as huge, as hyped up as Singles Day?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I mean, it comes down to a couple of factors. The first is that the Western media environment only has so much capacity for China-related news. And in that context, reporting on 2 e-commerce festivals per year isn't necessarily practicable or palatable. The second is that 618 is a challenger e-commerce festival, and the media doesn't really have a long-term relationship with this festival or its growth story. So again, a real win for the folks at Alibaba to be able to tell this story and then bring it out and wheel it out, as you said, months in advance, to be able to say, well, what originally started as a sort of a celebration of singledom to sort of take away some of the cultural stigma of being single has become this e-commerce extravaganza. That's a story that they're able to tell quite effectively, whereas Jingdong really struggled to be able to tell an equivalent story, or even the story of a challenger e-commerce festival, which I think would be actually quite interesting, but they just haven't made that step. But again, you and I argue the same thing. That is to say that this year, Western media should have certainly paid much more attention. So we've got, in US dollars, we've got $24.7 billion of sales this 618. And then Alibaba last year through Singles Day generated around 26 billion, which is the same order of magnitude. I mean, give or take, $1 billion, but it's still bigger than Black Friday and Cyber Monday combined. And there's two of those things in a year. I mean, the level of consumerism and the level of money that's flowing through the system certainly warrants attention. So aside from that sort of scale, another implication that we're seeing when we look at the sales figures from pretty much any e-commerce site that participates in these events is that there's depressed spending in the lead up to both. So many that are running Tmall stores or flagships on Jingdong or on sort of NetEase, Kaola, are finding that in the lead up, and it extends even to 2 months now, 2 months in the lead up to these things, they're just not getting the sales. People are adding things to carts, but they're not sort of converting the sale. They're waiting, they're biding their time. So it does have an effect on how people do business through the year. And that, again, is another interesting reporting angle. What do you think, Lauren? Have I missed anything there?
No, I mean, I think that's interesting what you were saying about other platforms feeling that there's depressed spending as well. I had written an article a while ago, sometime last year, about influencer-run brands on Alibaba, on Taobao, and like the Weibo influencers who are working with influencer incubators, and they are, like, for example, Zhang Dai and Sherry and some of these other top influencer brands on Taobao. And actually, if you look at their strategy for that, Singles Day is their strategy. Like, their strategy, the entire sales strategy focuses every year. So they actually, for example, like in the spring and in the summer, they're not as concerned about sales. It's all about getting new followers, getting people into their culture, getting people interested in them. You know, obviously they sell some products but it's all leading up to Singles Day. And then, they really, they might have, new products coming out throughout the entire year. But then, like you said, a couple months before Singles Day, they really start to prepare those specific products that are going to be sold for Singles Day. And they don't push sales for those couple of months, and it's literally like it's just a cycle every year of that, of Singles Day. And I mean, their Singles Day results are incredible. Like this past year, like last year, 4 of those influencer brands, I think 4 of them broke 100 million RMB in sales on Singles Day. But like you're saying, it does affect other platforms, and it does affect consumer spending, because they're they're just building it all up for this one day. And like you said, people are just putting things in their carts and holding off on spending for those holidays. So I do think that I mean, I guess for them the strategy works, but I don't know. It's I don't know how long it'll last. This cycle. I don't know. I mean, it seems like these holidays seem to get more spending every year.
Yes.
But I just don't know how long it will last, because I have, I feel like I had a lot of friends and friends back in China who weren't that interested in some of these holidays and didn't really participate in them anymore, because they felt like you had to wait until like midnight and then battle people, and you had to do all this research ahead of time, and they're like, it's just not worth the money. Like, I'll just spend spend more on it. Like, it's not, or I'll wait till another one of the smaller holidays. Like, I think, in some ways, Singles Day is getting too much of a battle for some people, Yeah,
no, that's right. And we are sort of starting to see there's a little bit of consumer backlash. I think a good example was across Women's Day. So both Jingdong and Alibaba went really hard at the subway stations across the country for just posterizing them with Women's Day ads for their Women's Day e-commerce sales. And some of the ads were received some blowback for being sort of disrespectful towards women, or that there were sort of misogynistic undertones. And so it just goes to show that the over-festivalization of e-commerce, so this idea that there's a ridiculous number of e-commerce festivals, and that the two big ones, 618 and Singles Day, are taking up so much attention and so much spend, maybe lends itself to consumers just turning off and becoming numb to the shopping extravaganzas. And certainly, I mean, watching the countdown and the sort of the dollars going up on big screens, and Pharrell Williams making an appearance last year. It certainly does sort of place consumerism on a pedestal, and it does make people question, especially those who are sort of fairly intellectual or aware of these sort of things. It sort of turns them off a little bit. So interesting to see how long the aggressive marketing will continue, but I think it's still got a couple of years left in it.
Yeah, and I think I guess something that I don't know, I honestly I didn't pay as much attention to 618 as the other holiday maybe, but I personally didn't feel like I saw as much involvement from influencers in, again, maybe, there were influencers that were working with brands for the holiday, but I think that one of the big differences is that, there's a lot of, like I was mentioning just now, that there's a lot of influencers who have their own stores on Alibaba owned properties, like Taobao. And so I think that there are maybe more influencers that also get involved in Singles Day, and then there's also, like you said, there's the Singles Day events, his big gala, and I think a lot of them get invited to that, and so I just feel like that there's also more involvement from influencers in the holiday. I don't know if that has any impact on the awareness around it.
No, that's right. I think 618 is sort of positioned itself as a sale, and that's it. Whereas Singles Day has become a sale plus, insofar as there's so much media engagement, there's so much attention on influencers, and as you said, influencers, or at least some of them, have built an entire strategy around the holiday, that everything is done for that end. And so that lends itself to a single focus, and I mean that's cool as long as the strategy works, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And now it's time for this week's Parklu Influencer Marketing Insights. 2018 has been the year of short videos, and I'm going to quickly introduce you to the pros and cons of Douyin, Kuaishou, Weishi, Nanni, Aidong, and Duke. Douyin's pros are that it has an upper middle class female user base and increasingly higher quality content. Its cons are it's very expensive to work with KOLs on the platform, and KOL reach is actually starting to drop. Kuaishou's pros are it already is very popular and has Tencent backing. Its cons are users are largely from third-tier cities, and even though it preceded Douyin, it doesn't really offer anything original. Weishi's pros are it has Tencent backing, it's much cheaper to work with KOLs and run campaigns. Its cons are many KOLs left Weishi after a false content payment scandal. Also, it's very similar to Douyin and lacks originality. Nanni's pros are it has Baidu backing, and it's benefited a lot from Weishi's issues with KOLs. Its cons are it's very similar to Douyin, it lacks originality, and Baidu doesn't really have much experience in the social media space. Aidong's pros are it's a Weibo product, and so all of the top Chinese celebrities and KOLs have Weibo Aidong accounts. Its cons are Weibo already has Weibo stories and Meipai, so it's unclear why they're creating this app. Also, it's very similar to Douyin and lacks originality. Duke's pros are, it's a seamlessly integrated social commerce experience and is very original, providing its own niche. Cons are, it's difficult to communicate products in 15 to 30 seconds, so viewer interest, creating original content, and avoiding being too commercial is going to be a challenge. For more insights and articles from Park Lu, please visit us at chinainfluencermarketing.com/parklu and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Okay, so I want to switch to maybe a completely different topic than what we've been talking about. But you had mentioned when we were prior to the interview that you were interested lately in video game live streaming platforms. And I don't know if you know anything about my history, but I come from a live streaming background, so I'm interested in what has sparked your interest in this topic, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so my interest in the sort of video game live streaming platforms was really born out of a project that I did over the winter, which was helping a local beer brand deepen its engagement with esports. Now, it already had some sponsorship and some involvement in esports, but it was really interested in the effect of Honor of Kings, 王者荣耀, and in terms of creating this new generation of casual gamers. So they really wanted to understand what these sort of casual gamers, what made them tick. And so we did interviews with a bunch of gamers around the country, and we observed that these video live streaming tools or platforms were both educational and entertainment for gamers. And I thought that combination was actually quite interesting. So I was really fascinated in terms of the different dynamics for different types of gamers. What they watched, where they watched it, when they watched, and how they watched. So that is the sort of the mentality when they're watching these things. And two that we really zeroed in on were Douyu and Huya. So literally fighting fish. and Toothy Tiger.
Yeah.
And at the time, we observed something quite interesting, which was it wasn't the serious commentators, it wasn't the pros or the semi-pros that were getting a strong following. It was the comedians.
Mm.
So people who were funny, had either funny in-game commentary or when they were playing themselves, or were sort of picking apart other people as they played, almost like Chinese versions of PewDiePie.
Mm.
And that was a really interesting point for me, where I sort of thought, oh wow, there's all this cultural difference and there's contextual difference, but at the end of the day, what draws large amounts of people in was these sort of comedian come gamers.
Mm.
And so when we were writing the report, we suggested that the brand team up with an already established comedian, and then incentivize them to start playing games and build a following. And sure enough, a couple of months after the report was finished and the dust had settled, Chizi, who is a famous comedian, originally on a show called the post 80s talk show, 今晚80后脱口秀, and then later on kind of like the Chinese version of roasting comedians, 吐槽大会, he started playing video games. As if to say that he realized the opportunity as well, so that there was, a space for people that were funny, and that maybe didn't originally have much of an idea of video games, but it was kind of fun to watch them sort of faff about, and rose to snatch a significant amount of PlayerUnknown's battlegrounds, so viewers, and became immensely popular in that space. So it was kind of like a mixture of PewDiePie and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Conan O'Brien. He sometimes plays video games. I think that segment is called Clueless Gamer. So it was kind of like the combination between these two, but a Chinese incarnation of it. And it was just super interesting to see one of our sort of hypotheses bear out in real life, that a comedian, a pre-established comedian, if they started playing games and delivered comedic value, but also sort of had some level of skill in game, would attract a massive following. And so for me, I've kept a watching eye on these platforms ever since.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, I completely understand what you're saying, but I guess I never really thought about it that way before. So are you finding that people are still interested in, because I know that some people watch it because they're trying to learn skills from better players. Is that also a popular reason to watch, or is the comedy really what's important?
Yeah, it's both. So it's both, and there's both an entertainment dynamic and a educational dynamic. For those who are new to the game, both are important. So it's important for you to learn, but in an entertaining environment. So you don't want someone who's too dry or too sort of straight-laced to sort of walk you through how to play the game. You want someone who's slightly more humorous or entertaining. And then at the top end, as you sort of increase your skill in the game, what you're looking for, it becomes more educational rather than entertainment focused. So those people will tend to gravitate towards semi-pros or pros, and they're really looking for tips, tricks, and hacks to be able to take themselves to the next level. So they watch it for an expressly educational purpose. So these sort of better gamers watch it for an expressly educational purpose. But what's interesting is when they're tired, they switch back to the funny people.
Oh, gotcha.
So it's kind of like, oh, this is all too much. I've listened to 30 minutes of pretty intense commentary. Oh, I'm a little bit pooped. What I'm going to do is I'm going to relax by watching the funny guy or the funny girl. And so that's the dynamic that we found that was really interesting when they switch, more so than kind of like what they're watching. So they'll move between the educational and the entertainment, but the really interesting part for brand engagement and the decision whether or not to sponsor or how to present brands within that environment is, well, what's the need state, and then what's the energy state? Do you want to be matching that energy level, or do you want to be offering something that can help boost that energy level, or do you want something that can maybe help you be a little bit more sort of relaxed? And so that was fascinating. I'm not sure when you were a live stream host whether you found that there was a similar mix between entertainment and education, and how that mix bore out in terms of your programming and your sort of live stream repertoire, if you will.
I think, I mean, I wasn't on the video game streaming platforms. So I think that people typically went to the platforms that I was on, purely for entertainment and not as much for education. So I think they went into it with that attitude of, most of them were in that phase that you were talking about of just being tired and wanting to relax, or, they were eating lunch and they just wanted something to do. So I think a lot of them went on to those platforms with that in mind. I mean, some of the platforms do have, like branded events and things like that. So there were some, I guess you could say, slightly more educational more informative types of content. But in general, I found that people would choose, platforms like Momo and Yizhibo, Inke, those kinds of platforms just for pure entertainment, a way to pass the time, not really looking to learn too much from it, just want interaction with other people. But it is interesting because a lot of these entertainment platforms have started to add in gaming, but not the type of gaming that's on Huya or Douyu, but more similar to, like, I'm not huge into gaming, so I don't know all the terminology, but okay. Like simpler games, like a lot of the mobile type games, and it's these very simple one-on-one type games where you can randomly be matched with another person on the platform and be playing a game with them. And a lot of these platforms have started to add that feature just as a way to retain users and give them something else to do and another way to interact with each other. I'm curious, when you were doing the research on those two gaming platforms, were there any major, I don't know if this is really what you were looking into, but did you find any major differences between the two platforms? And the reason that I'm asking this is because Huya recently IPO'd and Douyu is planning an IPO, and so I'm just curious, and both of them are backed by Tencent, and both of them have very similar offerings, and so I was just curious if there are any features or just anything that you noticed about them that was different.
For me, I think so we went into the interviews or the research knowing the sort of the ownership structure of each, and so we also were interested in this particular phenomenon. So Tencent had done a very good job of trying to own gaming. That includes owning the time or the attention spent on these services. To be perfectly honest with you, I personally don't think that there's a lot of difference. But I think what they're trying to emulate is Twitch. Now, what was interesting is that almost all of the gamers that we interviewed had software that allowed them to leap the Great Firewall. And so they had been watching Twitch before, I guess, these domestic platforms got really popular. So for them, they'd already sort of been preconditioned in terms of what to look for and that sort of thing. And these platforms themselves are a little bit derivative in the sense that they're just looking to replicate the same capture on attention or attention share. So not looking at major differences, but really what both of them represent is the rise of China's esports market. Esports are starting to look a lot more like professional sports wherever you go in the world. And in China, it's no different. I mean, it's already a $3 billion market, and it's been quite a quiet rise at that. So the idea that if you talked with serious gamers in China or around the world, and you ask them, well, what's the largest gaming market on the planet, very few would actually be able to come back with the idea that it's China. Really not much difference, but what it represents is an exciting future for China esports. And again, it seems another win for Tencent on the social side, being able to capture two live streaming platforms and adopting a bit of a portfolio strategy. So this idea of owning multiple properties in the same competitive space. Good move.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a big year for IPOs, and it'll be interesting to see how Douyu does in comparison to Huya. So I mean, I agree. It doesn't seem to be too many differences, but always interesting to hear other people's take on it. So now I want to switch to yet again another completely different topic, which is just and unfortunately, I haven't looked at this report in a while, so I'm a little bit fuzzy about it, but I did want to talk to you about it. That I think it was a couple months ago, Tencent put out a report, and it was getting some buzz in kind of our industry and community. The report, one of the takeaways was that post 2000 consumers in China are not as interested in influencers and online influencers. They don't trust them as much or believe in them as much. I know that you've commented on this before, I think probably on LinkedIn or in some articles or things like that. And so I would like to get your take on this, because I find that, at least in my opinion, that people tend to go a little extreme with this report. You know, they see these findings and they're like, "Oh, influencer marketing is dying," and I think it's very interesting findings, and it's something that we need to keep in mind. But I also don't think that it's like I don't think that this report is giving a death toll to influencer marketing in China, at least in my opinion. But I would love to hear what you have to say first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to sort of keep a watching brief on it. I think the issue is there. So this study, for your listeners, was done with, or was a survey done with 15,000 post 2000s, and the overwhelming majority said that they didn't, or they found, and this is important, wanghong and davi. So those are two Chinese terms which refer to influencers, but the specific connotation is a little bit different from the word influencer or the word KOL. We'll come to that in a sec. Didn't trust those as much, or trusted those less than celebrities when it came to product endorsements. So again, we've got to look at this in the context of the survey question. So those two individual or groups of individuals, this kind of like wanghong or davi, look, those are people who are at the sort of the top of their game when it comes to popularity, and the connotation is that the cultural connotation is that they're cashing in on that via pushing product. And so what I think this survey reflects more so than anything else is that it reflects the fact that celebrity-like endorsements from influencers, especially in the China context, so it comes across as superficial and as a cash grab, especially and this is confined to this higher end. So for instance, a great example would be somebody like Go-Go Boy, who we mentioned earlier. Now, Go-Go Boy is on the internet at least everywhere. He's the equivalent of kind of like seeing Lu Han or Chris Wu in the subway. Lu Han will be eating KFC 1 minute, he'll be repping a luxury brand the next, and then he'll be drinking water or eating cheesels the next. It comes across as really superficial. And the same is for those wanghong or davi, the stuff that they're pushing, and the way that they're pushing it is exactly that. It's pushing product. And that's a turn-off for any age group or any follower base. It just so happens that this study was directed towards people who were born after 2000. So that's the big takeaway for me. I don't think that it means influencer marketing is dead. I think people who make that conclusion should really sort of have a think carefully about, one, relying upon a single piece of evidence, two, not understanding enough about how the survey was constructed and composed, and then three, not understanding what wanghong and davi really are. But it is a wake-up call for brands in terms of how they operate with influencers. This idea of using influencers solely as a content distribution booster, shot in the arm, and then saying bye-bye, thank you very much at the end of the engagement. It does seem that this is wearing thin with consumers at the younger end. And those who are young and informed will see through flimsy or overly commercial product pushes. They're pimping out product, if you will. So I think it serves as a warning to brands more so than anything else. I don't think it signals the death of influencer marketing. In fact, much of the stuff we've talked about today with respect to influencers opening their own WeChat stores and commanding a great amount of attention, a great amount of sales, says the exact opposite. But the cash grab by brands and some influencers themselves will result in a loss of engagement and trust over the long term. So it's a paradox. The more you blow up and the more you get popular, the more brands will come to approach you, but in so doing, the more that you seem to be pushing product and overly commercial. So you've got to, on the one hand, be able to monetize, but on the other hand, you've got to keep the authenticity that got you there in the first place. So it's a challenge for the whole industry.
Exactly. And I really agree with everything that you said and how you explained it. I just want to go back to kind of that the first thing that you pointed out is that people need to take a really close look at what the question was and what people were being asked, because if you understand anything about the influencer marketing space in China, you probably know that the word wanghong is actually generally has a negative connotation, and that brands that a brand should not necessarily work with a wanghong. A wanghong, at least in the mind of someone like me, who writes a lot about influencer marketing, a wanghong is more of an internet celebrity. They're not known for, they're famous and they have a lot of followers, and maybe they produce very entertaining content, but they don't necessarily have an area of expertise, and their followers don't follow them because they want to learn about something necessarily. They don't turn to that person when they want to find out about, what's the best fashion or what's the best skincare product or what should I be feeding my baby. They're not, that's not a wanghong. That's an influencer is someone that is the word KOL is actually a really great word because it's key opinion leader, right? It's someone that has like an opinion and they lead other people because their opinion is seen as valuable, and I think first of all, this question in most Chinese people's mind, just the word wanghong, I mean, Davi is like, that doesn't have as much of a negative connotation, I don't think, but it still doesn't really mean influencer. I think that wanghong to many people has this negative connotation of somebody who just like became internet famous and blew up overnight, and now they're just trying to like sell stuff, and and a lot of people they also don't want to call themselves like wanghong. Like I don't think that calling myself or something, wanghong, like I wouldn't be that proud of that word. I'd be, it's not really something that I would be proud of either. So I think that, to start off, that the words, the terminology used in the survey were kind of going to lead to that maybe conclusion anyway, because I wouldn't trust wanghong. I would trust a KOL, an influencer, to me, that's a big difference. And I think, unfortunately, it comes down to semantics and people just lumping things together, and I think a lot of just average Chinese average Chinese consumers don't actually know the term KOL. They don't actually know, it just kind of, oftentimes wanghong is used as this general umbrella, and a lot of just average consumers don't really think about the difference between a internet celebrity and an influencer that's providing valuable information. Like they don't, they don't think about that as much. Like we're in the industry, so we think about like these differences, but they might not,
That's so right, and there's so much nuance, even with the term wanghong itself. So calling somebody a wanghong, as you said, or saying that somebody has a a wanghong dian. So the face of a wanghong is generally negative, but then when you apply it to other stuff, so for instance, if you go to eat or drink at a wanghong dian, so this idea of a place that blew up on the internet, that's quite popular and quite positive. So this idea of hitting up the latest coffee spot or hitting up the latest brunch place and it being called a wanghong dian, that's where it sort of takes back a neutral or a positive term. So there's so much nuance with that word alone. And then, as you said, because KOLs exist on a spectrum, or there's different levels of KOL, but the word KOL is not used by consumers themselves, we've got a real limit in terms of what we can play with when we're asking a survey question. Mm-hmm. So the folks at Tencent or Penguin Research, which is an arm of Tencent, when it comes to their survey design, I think have some points of feedback. The first point is that the terminology they use, they ask a double-barrel question. So they ask two terms in the one question, which is a no for survey design. It confuses the respondent, and you're not sure as interpreting the results whether they're responding to one, the other, or both terms in aggregate. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, being able to at least provide examples with the question. So the original question didn't give any examples, so it left it to the respondent's imagination as to what those people are. So the first thing that popped in person A's head could have been a very negative connotation, whereas in person B's head it was another connotation. We can't control for that in any meaningful way. And then the last one is this idea of a watching brief on this group. What I don't see a lot of among many Chinese research institutions that are focused on the internet is longitudinal studies. So being able to ask this question over time. Many just do whatever the latest thing is or provide an update, and then that's them. But if Penguin Research is really able to keep at it, in terms of, the next year they've got a fresh start to ask a better survey question, and then track the responses over time, then I think that's something which is actually quite useful and quite powerful. So a bit to work on, but so much nuance. And apart from a few sort of technical things, I'm not sure how to pose that question without using wanghong or davi in a way that in a way that consumers can understand. So as an industry, maybe we've got to get better labels.
Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't really know a better way to say it either, but I do agree with with the findings, though in some sense, like you were saying, just that brands really need to rethink how they work with influencers, and this is something I write about pretty much every article I write in. It's just that, people need to be focusing on, or brands, need to be focusing on establishing relationships with influencers and, making the influencer their fan and, just treating the influencer as more than just a one-off distribution channel. And it's just, unfortunately, it's not all brands are really catching on to that. But I do think that it's not just these post-2000 consumers that are feeling this way. I think that a lot of different age groups of Chinese consumers are feeling this way. It's just over the past couple of years as this influencer economy just ballooned and there's all these people that are becoming internet celebrities, and like you mentioned, there's a lot of them that are just trying to make money quickly and are kind of willing to promote different products and work with all these different brands, and I think that people are getting tired and they're getting very suspicious of content, and I mean I think that even, I've posted content before where I'm not working with this product or this brand, but people just, are suspicious now. And so they think that you are, and they're like, oh, it's an ad. And you're like, no, actually it's not. I mean, that'd be great if it was. I'd like to get paid, but, but it's not. It's really not, and so I think that, this is a phenomenon that we're seeing among all Chinese consumers, is just that they're getting a little bit jaded, because they've caught on to the fact, I think before maybe some of them didn't realize that, people were getting paid for this. And now it's very well known, that people get paid for this. And so they've become a lot less trusting, of it. Yeah. And so I think that it's like you said, some of it is an influencer issue. You need to find the influencers that are, maybe once every couple of posts they're doing a sponsored post. Not every single post is trying to sell something. That they're still, the majority of their content is still unsponsored, and it's genuinely wanting to help their audience, and then they sprinkle some sponsored content in there with it, and that they always put their audience first. And I think that brands just need to be smart about choosing to work with those kinds of influencers, and not working with the influencers that are just trying to make a cash grab, So I think that there are good and bad, influencers out there, and so yeah, that is an issue. But like you said, it's also an issue that brands really need to think about their relationship with the influencers too, because even if you work with an incredible influencer, but if you're just throwing a campaign at them and you hire them once and then you never talk to them again, that's going to come off badly with them too, because they're just promoting your brand once and then they need to go find other work. So of course they might work with your competitor or something else, and then that, so I just think it's on both ends.
Yeah, quite right.
I want to kind of wrap up. I know we've covered a lot, and so I was just wondering if you could let everybody know, if they want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, great. So the first and probably the best way is LinkedIn. So Michael Norris, and then from there, you can follow. I post almost daily on pretty much anything to do with China that's interesting, but with a real focus on consumers and digital behavior, as well as digital competition between the big internet giants. And then I also have a WeChat mini program where I house some of the better stuff that I've produced in both English and Chinese, and I call it a China cheat sheet. Insofar as if you read that, then you can go to a meeting afterwards and sound pretty smart about China. So it's kind of like I believe you call it a crib sheet in America, and in Australia it's called a cheat sheet. So it has that sort of effect. So yeah, happy to speak more with listeners on LinkedIn, and looking forward to continuing to read your work, Lauren, and yeah, keep eyes on this very fascinating industry that we're in.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed talking about this wide variety of topics with you today. It was really great, and I know people are going to find it super fascinating, because we covered a lot of things that, like we said, maybe are not showing up as frequently in Western media. So I'm sure people will find it super interesting.
Thanks very much. Really appreciated the opportunity, and like you said, we covered a lot of interesting ground today, and maybe it's new ground for a lot of people, but it will certainly be on the radar very quickly.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed these 2 episodes with Michael. Again, you can find his contact info and links to everything that we talked about in the show description or in the show notes on chinainfluencermarketing.com. I'd love to hear what you think, so you can leave me a comment also on chinainfluencermarketing.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you like this episode and know somebody else who might like it too, please don't forget to share it. Thanks, and talk to you next week.